Jose?
Hey, Tammy. How are you? Can you hear me?
Jose?
Yeah, it's Jose.
Can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me, Rob, or no?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you're perfectly fine.
Uh-oh.
I can hear you.
All right, that's good.
Wonder if Tammy has to turn up her speaker or something. I don't know.
Hey, Jose, I'm going to be kind of in the background for the first little bit.
Sure, I like the background you have.
I got no audio. They can hear me, I can't hear them.
Hi, Shia Molly. Hey, Jose. Steve Wells.
Hey,
VDOT.
Steve.
How y'all doing?
Great.
Good.
Good.
Hey, Rob, I think Lori was having signing in.
hear me now?
Can you
Jose
hear
was
that,
talking to
Tammy?
me and I couldn't hear.
Okay.
Tammy, can you hear us now?
Maybe.
Or just get out and get back in.
Okay.
Looks like she has an IT professional there, so
It's good to have those handy.
that's right. We'll just give it one more minute and see if Tammy and maybe Lori kicks in by then. Otherwise, we'll just get started and have everybody catch up. But please give her another minute here.
Probably trying to get out here while we sold out. The secret to El Torito success.
All right. Well, I don't know what happened to Tammy, but we'll let her get back in a second. I think it's.
I'm back. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear us, Tammy?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much.
Great. Perfect. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Rob Walker, and I'm going to be, helping tonight, coordinate the discussion. I think Lori Zell will join here in a second. And Lori and I typically tag team this. We have Jose from Supervisor Alcorn's office really monitoring things from behind and the scenes and helping us with a lot of the slideshow, the graphics and everything, which is always very, very helpful. I do want to remind everybody, we are recording this, just so everybody's aware of that. We do try to record these, and so we'll have them accessible for those who aren't able to attend. And then sometimes people can refer back to those as well. We typically go through a little bit of the ground rules. I usually have Lori do that, but I'll just take a crack at it. I mean, first of all, if you're not talking, please put your phone or your computer on mute, and then we'll certainly there'll be a point in time where we're looking for everybody's comments, and we'll ask you. We'll try to orchestrate that the best we can. For anyone who hasn't been to this meeting in the past, we dive right into getting comments from folks, and then we try to memorialize those comments in a matrix fashion, and we'll bring that up in a bit. And then we try to collect everybody's comments and really try to make sure we're getting everybody's input to the best we can. So I do want to summarize where we've been. We initiated this study group with a kickoff meeting. We had a site visit. And, you know, again, this is, this study group was formed in, because of the Campus Commons land use application. And the idea was that there was a need to have a stronger pedestrian connection from the east side of Wiehle Avenue to the west side, heading toward Metro across Wiehle Avenue. And so the applicant had proposed some alternatives, and this study group has been looking at those alternatives, and then we are also, you know, looking at other alternatives. So the first couple evenings we met, we went over what we call options 1A through B and then C. Those were, I call those, you know, overhead pedestrian bridge overpasses in various concepts for that. Some had ramps and others have elevators and or a combination thereof. And you'll see some of that a little bit later tonight in some of the other presentations. So then the last meeting, we actually studied and looked at the tunnel concept, and we just simply tried to get some input from people on the tunnel idea. That was not an idea proposed by the developer. That was one that came up basically through comments through the community. So then tonight, we're here to talk about the at-grade crossing. The at-grade crossing specifically at Wiehle Avenue and the toll road ramps. And the applicant had shown an at-grade crossing on their plans as kind of like a baseline. So we're here to talk about that or really any form of that. So, you know, we want to talk about just the at-grade crossing in general. We want to, you know, that's what we're going to get comment on tonight. We try to want to stick to our specific topic of the evening. We do tonight have, after we get comment on the at-grade crossing from everybody, I believe we have representatives from Fairfax County Department of Transportation that are gonna make a presentation and talk about the consultant that they've hired to look at the corridor along Wiehle Avenue. And then there'll be a little bit of a question and answer session after that. So one thing I wanted to make sure I remembered to note, the last couple meetings, I know there seemed to be some questions about the existing pedestrian at-grade crossing at Sunrise Valley Drive and Wiehle Avenue. And I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on this, that the pedestrian crossing at Wiehle Avenue and Sunrise Valley Drive exists today in the east-west direction. The application for Campus Commons has proposed improvements to that crossing. There is actually going to be a new added right turn lane on the westbound direction of Sunrise Valley Drive. And then there's a couple pork chop islands that kind of break up that pedestrian crossing today. And at least I'm pretty certain the east side pork chop island gets removed when that new right turn lane comes in. And the developer has made commitments to do improvements to that pedestrian crossing, making a high visibility pedestrian crossing with new pedestrian heads, as I understand the proffer. So what this study group is talking about is not ever eliminating that crossing, or is not intended to be in lieu of that crossing. That's kind of always been the kind of like the plan for that crossing to continue and exist and be in that location at Sunrise Valley Drive and Wiehle Avenue. So hopefully that's clear with everybody. A couple other ground rules. We do have a set stop time. We stop at 9 o'clock and we won't go past that. It's for everybody's benefit. So we do want to be clear and concise with our comments and make sure we can wrap up in time. And with that, I think I have gotten through the introduction and beginning comments. Jose, I'm not sure, we didn't orchestrate this ahead of time, but Jose, do we have a picture of the at-grade crossing that we could bring up to tee up the comment section? Okay, so this is an example of the matrix that we've been using for the comments, and then we'll populate that as the comments come along. So just to orient everybody, so the graphic on the screen is again, the at-grade pedestrian crossing. to the right of the page is the east direction where the Campus Commons development is proposed, kind of I'll call it a corner park. And that corner park is kind of there's a bit of, quite a bit of topography, grade that slopes away from you from left to right. And so then that corner park is there on the Campus Commons development. And their idea was to funnel some folks, pedestrians through their development, bring them to this corner location, and then have them cross over at the at-grade crossing, and then get to the west side and then continue on to get to the metro station. Give everybody a little order of magnitude. I think it's about 140 feet of crossing today, if you go curb to curb, just to give everybody a feel for that. And it's quite a number of lanes of traffic. And again, some of that could be modified over time, or there could be a reduction of lane widths given different scenarios. And then there's quite a bit of a big median in the middle that is part of that crossing. So what we'd like to do is go from here and just actually start taking comment, just try to get people's opinions of the at-grade crossing and kind of document some of that, and then we'll go into the Department of Transportation's presentation.
This is Lori. How are you?
Hi, Lori. Good. Thanks. I'm glad you
Hey,
joined.
I'm sorry I had so much trouble getting in tonight. I'm not sure. I have 2 different email addresses, and anyway, Jose got me in. Thank you, Jose. Did you already go through the ground rules of how the format of our of our comment section?
I did.
Okay, super.
And,
So
we talked about the stop time at 9 o'clock, and
I got that part. Super. And I won't belabor it, but just to recall, if Jose, if you could put up the pros, cons, and questions section for this, and then people can start going around, and we can, if you're comfortable raising your hand, that's great. But because you're here, we want to hear from you. So I'm going to call on everyone, and because if some people show up at one meeting and not at others, they may not know that certain people are from Fairfax County or they're a developer. So I'm going to call on everyone. And if you're a developer and you have nothing to say about it, or if you're a, Fairfax County, you can just say, hey, I'm who you are, so people will know. And then we'll move on to the next person. Okay? Tammy Petrine, I have you at the top.
Thank you. Lori, would you please put back the bridge picture
Yes,
so that we can comment on that? Looking at this, I am wondering if we couldn't orient the bridge, I don't know, 20 feet further south, this crosswalk, 20 feet further south, and eliminate that pork chop, slide that pork chop south till it gets to the curb, and make the lane coming off the toll road a right angle so it slows that traffic down. And what this would do would be shorten the distance across the many lanes of Wiehle and end up in a safe spot versus a pork chop. We've discussed in the past that pork chop is gonna, if there's plowing, gonna fill up with snow. You might be caught on that pork chop with an inhospitable dog. There may be too many people on the pork chop to accommodate the crowd. I think the pork chop is just a deadly piece of this proposal. And if we could eliminate it by sliding the whole crossing further south, shorten the crossing distance. Is there any reason that would not work? Would make a right angle off the ramp of the tollway to slow traffic down, so they'd have to be watching for pedestrians.
So your question is, can we move that whole crosswalk back 20 feet and make it a little bit safer, 20 feet south?
Correct. And I'm picking up the 20 feet, but just eliminate,
Yeah.
because there's no scale on this map, eliminate as such a wide crossing and get rid of that pork chop that isolates people.
Okay, can you
Keep
tell us
going.
what you don't like about the current format of it? So,
The pork chop is deadly.
Okay.
And the crossing time is for pedestrians is so long that it will slow down the through traffic on the bridge. So the shorter we can make that trip for people, the better.
okay, so Jose, I think that's important. The crossing time is too long. Don't like the pork chop. It's not you don't like the pork chop, it's that you think it is dangerous.
Oh, it's terribly dangerous.
Okay,
And I've told you my story about seeing the woman jogger come on, two women with dogs on the pork chop, and one of the dogs went after the jogger. And it was not funny because the jogger couldn't get off the pork. This was not here, this was at Sunrise
Mhm.
and Wiehle. And that was a potentially deadly situation.
Yes. Did you have any pros for this, Tammy?
Other than it's the cheapest thing possible to do.
Okay,
And it also gets people more directly where they want to go if you're not on the pork chop. They can go down the hill to the metro, or they can cross the ramp and go on the existing bridge, Wiehle Bridge sidewalk to go north.
okay. Did you have any other pros or cons or
No,
questions?
thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Brian Winterhalter.
I am here, and as the representative for the applicant, I think I will give the balance of my time to everyone else.
Thank you, Brian. Bruce Wright.
Yes, hi. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
You can. I agree with Tammy. I think moving that crosswalk south would reduce the crossing distance, and it would get rid of that pork chop that I don't really like. The pork chop further south at Sunrise Valley is dangerous, and most motorists who are making a right turn to go west don't stop. If you've ever noticed, if you ever sat there and observed, they don't stop for pedestrians unless you really get out there and are very aggressive. So I like that part of it. I mean, so that would be something I would like to see changed. I like this option much better than the bridge options for a couple of reasons. One, I think it fits into the kind of an urban streetscape better than having a bridge. I think the crossing time, even with the pork chop, I would cross at grade rather than going to the elevator, pushing the button, waiting, going upstairs, walking across, pushing the button, or walking upstairs, going each way. I think that's too convoluted, and I think many people won't use that. I think those are the two main comments. One other comment, I guess, would be I would love to see the lane widths on Wiehle narrowed. I know VDOT has been much more receptive to narrower lanes, especially if the speed limit was lower. And I think we should lower the speed limit there as well. If it's not congested, people will fly through there. When it's congested, the speed limit really doesn't matter because people are going so slow. So I'd like to see the lane widths narrowed and the speed limit lowered. And that's all that comes to mind right now.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, and do you think Jose captured your thoughts? Bruce?
Yes, I think
Okay.
it's. I was
Okay.
just reading it.
Okay. Connie, you're next.
Okay. We have to have a street crossing. And I agree with all the comments that have been said so far. I think snow on on that pork chop, it just will make it unusable. So I'm sorry I don't have anything to add, but I agree with the others.
Okay. Jose, can you go ahead and add snow on the pork chop? Because I haven't thought about that. So that's a definite con, snow.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Cullen?
Hey folks, this is Cullen McCormick. I'm with the consultant team that's helping Fairfax County. So I'll be presenting a little later.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I'm actually the deputy director of FCDOT, so I will allow the much smarter and much more knowledgeable Mark Dreyfus speak for us this evening.
Okay, thank you for coming. Thanks for listening.
No problem.
That's why we're introducing you. Jay?
Yes. So I would like to ask the question, would there be an at-grade crossing, even if we did a bridge or tunnel? And then I'd also like to hear, an actual safety record on pork chops and, if there are more accidents and, things like that. My understanding from reading the actual proposal of the crosswalk originally when they presented, or the developer presented, was that by having the pork chop out there, you seriously reduce the time of crossing because you could get people across the street to the pork chop while people were turning right from the toll road onto South Wiehle. So if you take out the pork chop, how much time does that add to the crossing? I'm certainly I'm all for safety. So if there is an issue with pork chops and the time isn't really that bad, then, get rid of it. That's it.
That's a great question. Asking for the facts. That's a great question, just to do a little research, it seems to me. Any other comments, pros or cons?
No, I'd say, I would rather a bridge than the crossing, but,
Okay. We can put down as number 4 would prefer a bridge. Does that capture your thoughts, Jay?
yes, that's it for me.
Okay. We'll move on to Jeffrey.
Yes, hi. I'm also with Fairfax County DOT. I'm the division chief for site analysis and transportation planning. I too am here in support of Mark, so I'll defer my time to him.
Perfect. Well, we don't really have time constraints. We want to hear everybody, but thank you. Ken, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Ken Hool with the developer TF Cornerstone. I guess real quick, I'd say, probably don't want to give a lot of opinions because I think this venue is really more about everyone else's, but I did think Bruce made a lot of excellent points. So I would agree with everything he said. I would also agree with Tammy's point that if removing the pork chop and having it be a direct crossing would be preferable from a pedestrian standpoint. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, and then just on Jay's question, the crosswalk does exist with or without the bridge, unless as a part of the study group, the supervisors tell us to eliminate it. But it's an obligation of ours as it currently stands in addition to the bridge, not as an either or.
Thank you, Ken. Jose, I don't, because he's not impartial, we need to not include his comments though, but they were for people to hear. Kevin Nelson.
Hello, I'm with VDOT. We're just here in support. I will point out that there's some issues with the limited access lines there, which are going to cause some of the sidewalks to be narrow. if this option is chosen. Also, Mark will probably point out the reason that the pork chop is there is so that there can be a right turn phase for the traffic there, which doesn't conflict with the pedestrians. If any of you want to look at the traffic study the developer did, that kind of points out some of their reasoning for having the pork chop there. I don't disagree with some of the other points that were made about the pork chop with the snow removal and such, but there was a reason that that pork chop was put in there. It was basically to help with the pedestrian phasing and with the right turn phasing there.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hey, Lori, this is
Yeah.
Bruce. Can I ask a quick question of
Sure.
Kevin? Yeah, Kevin, is that going to be a signalized crossing from the pork chop to the south side?
Yes, that would be signalized because that's under their proposal. It's proposed to be a dual right turn lane. So that would definitely be signalized, and the pedestrians would have a phase across the right turn, the dual right turns there.
So the crossing time for a pedestrian is really when they get to the south side. It's not when they get from the east side to the pork chop. It would be east side, pork chop, and then south side. That would be the total crossing time.
Yes, that's correct. So you would have a break in the phase there, potentially, depending on how they phase it.
So you'd have to wait for the pedestrian signal. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Bruce, some of us are visual learners, and so that was hard for me to follow. So I'm going to follow it better when Mark walks us through the presentation. I'm going to skip over you, Mark, because you're going to have a lot of time today. Margaret? Margaret Parker? Did you want to have a pro or a con? Or a question today? Okay. Maurice Fleist. Maurice, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry.
You're unmuted now, Maurice.
Thank you. I have serious questions about the safety of this crossing, no matter how you do it, no matter where it is, because you've got a lot of people trying to get on the toll road and get off the toll road. To me, the safest thing to do is to go back to the existing crossing and make that the crossing. But getting back to the one that's under consideration tonight, there's an elevation issue. From Campus Commons, getting up to the street level to cross, there's approximately a 30-foot embankment, which the developer proposes to make into a park with a switchback trail and steps. To get people up there in bad weather is going to be a big problem. Will people actually use it? I don't know. Then you've got the right turning traffic, the traffic that's headed north on Wiehle, turning right on the toll road. In the winter, rush hour, people trying to get to the metro at the crosswalk, people trying to get on the toll road from Wiehle, making a right turn. Very hazardous. You get across to the pork chop, you've got people who are getting off the toll road headed south on Wiehle. Again, very hazardous. Are all the pedestrians going to observe the walk, don't walk signs? Probably not. If they don't see a car coming, they'll go out there. It's a long way across, about 9 lanes of traffic. I just don't think it could possibly be safe in every circumstance. Then Tammy's idea of moving the crossing south 20 or 30 feet does make some sense. I would ask the folks from VDOT and FCDOT what that does to the signalized intersection, the traffic signals for the people who are going to be going straight ahead on Wiehle, turning onto the toll road. How could that possibly work? And then I want to make one comment about Sunrise Valley and Wiehle.
Hang on. So you mean how long it will make the signal or at the intersection there? If
The placement of the signals. If you move that back, how does that take care? I mean, first of all, it shortens the distance between existing signals. Is there enough space to stack the traffic? Is there enough, would it make sense to make a right turn onto the toll road headed north if the signal is way back 20 to 30 feet from the actual intersection? I just have some questions. I'm not a traffic engineer. I know nothing about traffic engineering. I just have, as a motorist and as a pedestrian mainly, I have questions about the safety. To me, the only safe option of getting people from that part of Campus Commons to the west side of Wiehle is an underpass. So I strongly prefer the underpass. The consultant, I hope, will be given a chance to talk tonight about the crossing times. If you look at that document that was just, that Jose sent out to all of us, the crossing time for the underpass is so vastly shorter than this at-grade crossing or the bridge option. It makes so much sense that this is something people would use, and it's safe, it's protected from the weather. To me, it's a no-brainer. But I would like to, at some point tonight, Laurie, talk about the intersection at Wiehle and Sunrise Valley. The developer is going to improve the intersection, but their proposal is only 2/3 of the way there. They do not have a crossing from the southeast corner of Sunrise Valley up to Campus Commons. It's only a two-way crossing as it is today. They're not proposing a third crossing point, which greatly limits that intersection. Thank you.
Great questions. So I think, and great comments, Maurice, thank you. So Jose, at the end of those questions, can you add a question about and Maurice, you help me with this if I have this correct or not, because this is your comment, not mine. You want to know if the developer or if VDOT can
position the traffic signals if we were to move that crosswalk back southward 20 to 30 feet. What does that do to the traffic signals at that very congested, very dangerous intersection for traffic that's going north on Wiehle, right on the toll road in the opposite direction, going south on Wiehle, and going from the toll road south on Wiehle?
And then I guess your last question was, does it make sense to just reinforce or upgrade the intersection at Sunrise and Wiehle so that there are three distinct safe crossing places?
Absolutely. Which is, by that time, you're pretty much at grade. You don't have to actually climb up 30 feet to get to the, and make sure, yeah, okay, so he's got in the
I want to
elevation
make
issue.
sure I have both of your questions, because
Thank
those are
you.
good questions. Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you.
Mike McDermott.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, as I'm listening to this conversation, it strikes me that this is the cheapest, fastest, and most dangerous option that we've talked about in just short terms. So I'm just going to say to Jose, add me for negative number 1, add me to negative number 2, and add me to the positive number 1 and positive number 2. And I strongly support everything Maurice just said. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, you just expedited things. Thank you. Scott. Scott, you're on mute.
Am I muted still?
You're unmuted.
I am unmuted. You can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, to Maurice's question, I do not represent VDOT. I do not represent FCDOT. 20 to 30 feet change represents roughly one vehicle of queue length. So that's your impact on the queue length if you shift the stop bar by 20 to 30 feet. Just wanted to answer that very quickly. I agree with Tammy that I don't like arriving on the pork chop. The question I have is, What's the overall plan for the west pedestrian landing there with the intent to remove the bus terminal, the bus lanes, the bus pieces? Is there an opportunity for improvement there that would make this a reasonably safe crossing? I do agree that shifting it south of the point of turning onto the Dulles Toll Road eastbound is a good idea. And reading my notes here. And I guess the ultimate real question I have is, because we're dealing with something that's a little bit out of what's in the proffers and the approved pieces of legislation, is would the developer be willing to fund the signalization changes if we shifted the crosswalk south and slightly away from the actual toll road ramps? And as most people know, I do believe that a properly designed at-grade crossing can be safe. And the emphasis there is properly designed.
Any more pros or cons or questions, Scott?
More an editorial comment. We're including a pork chop, and although it's been stated that it would be a phased crossing from the pork chop in one case, and we're eliminating them in others. So as we are at the Sunrise Valley Wiehle Avenue intersection, I'm not a fan of pork chops. Just me. So that's editorial. Jose, you don't have to include that anywhere. That's just my editorial piece. But I would just reemphasize that a properly designed at-grade crossing can be safe and can be efficient and balance the needs of everybody.
Thank you, Scott. I think though we should add, Jose, I think it's on number 1 or 2. You're not a fan of pork chops. Is it all right if we add you there?
That's fine.
Okay.
Although I do cook them pretty well.
So, although you are not with those particular, you do have a background in traffic, and so you have a little more knowledge than the average Joe here. Or
I am a traffic engineer, and for the knowledge of the group, I'm consultant staff to the Florida Department of Transportation District 1 as we speak. And I'm coming to you live from Lakeland, Florida. Although my home is in Reston.
Yes, although he was a co-chair with me and Rob. Rachel Flynn.
Hi, Lori and team. I'm the Deputy County Executive, so I was listening in to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for being here.
Sure. Thanks for your thoughtful questions and everyone's answers. Very nice.
Rob, I'm going to skip over you. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I do want to have a comment at some point.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
You know, similar to Scott, you know, I have a transportation background as well, and I just would reiterate Bruce's comments and Scott's to some degree that I think a properly designed pedestrian at-grade crossing can be safe and is the appropriate answer here. There's a lot of traffic calming approaches to this that maybe we'll hear from the consultant tonight, or maybe in the future, that, you know, can lessen some of the concerns that some people have about safety and making radiuses smaller and the crossing less wide with less width. There's a lot of reduction in lanes that are happening across the county that are being very helpful. So I think there's a kind of a multimodal approach that's that will be the best fit here. And I look forward to seeing the consultants, look at those type of options.
Okay, so I'm not going to put any comments down, right? Because you did not come out in pro or con to anything, and you didn't have a question. Is that right?
I thought I was pretty pro to the at-grade crossing being the preferred crossing, and certainly against the pork chops as well.
Okay.
I can see, and that's what happens when you lessen the width. You can reduce and eliminate the pork chops.
So Rob, is it safe to say for a pro, you would be number 2, or number 3, you would say yes to? And then on the con for the pork chop, we added you to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure we have your thoughts down. Shyamali. It's a beautiful name, and I want to say it right.
Shamali.
Shamali. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
just
Much
ignore
nicer.
the Y.
Shamali. Okay, gorgeous. Your turn.
I am actually on staff with Supervisor Alcorn, and though I live just around the corner from all of this, I'll kind of stay in the background and listen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for coming. Stephen Cherney. Cherney?
Yes, Tierney. I align myself in full with Bruce Wright's comments, with Tammy's comments, as well as Robert's just now. I think at-grade crossing is much better than the bridge options, which at this point I reject both of them. The key here is really what Robert just brought up with regard to traffic calming. That is so important that traffic calming measures be put in place. This area really is somewhat of a speedway now, with people going to the continuous right turn on Sunrise Valley, and people trying to make a left turn light when it's green. And it's the South Lakes, the Sunrise Valley crossing is a dangerous crossing in its current configuration. So it's absolutely necessary that the 2 continuous right turns be eliminated, and that every traffic calming measure that would work, including reduced speed limit, reduced lane widths, and any other measures that the folks from the 2 DOTs could come up with, certainly need to be looked at too. What we really need to look at here is changing driver behavior in this area, and it's going to take multiple measures to do that.
Okay, so I see Jose's adding, can we add sufficient traffic calming measures? Did he capture your pro and your con? It's hard to see because we're trying to straddle 2 different pages.
Yeah, what page is Jose on right now? I can't really see page 8.
Um, 7 and a little bit of page 8. Does that capture what?
You have to go further down on page 8.
So he put your traffic calming question up higher. It's on number 2 on page between 7 and 8.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay, all right. Okay, Stephen Welch.
Good evening. I'm Steve Welch. I'm with VDOT District Administration. I'm the Assistant Director for Transportation and Land Use to Fairfax County, and I'm here to listen in support of the project.
Thank you so much for coming.
Sure. Thank you.
Tom?
This is Tom Bishadny. I'm the Director of Fairfax County DOT. I'm here as a resource supporting Mark tonight. I
think we have more Fairfax County folks here than we have residents. This is embarrassing, but thank you.
We're here to serve.
Mr. Alcorn, did you have any thoughts, or did you talk at all today? Did you want to say something?
No, thank you. I joined a little bit late, but just want to thank everybody for all your work on this and all the thinking going into it. This is important. This is basically, this effort is really critical to figure out how to connect that east side quadrant with, in effect, the transit station. So, and then I think as we've already heard, it's more than that. You know, there's going to be a lot more activity emerging in that TSA. So this very thorough review of all these options, I think, is extremely helpful, and I appreciate everybody's work on this.
Well, we're really glad you're here. I'm happy to have you back. Sorry that you had to miss several of our meetings.
Yeah, sorry I had to miss a couple of those meetings, but I'm back.
I'm glad you're back.
Thank you.
I have one question to add to this, Jose. So number 9, I guess we're talking about traffic, and I'm just curious how the 6,000 cars that are estimated to be moved in and out of the campus commons development, you know, are we, with COVID and people driving, you know, it's definitely, you know, going to be an issue, people trying to get their cars out of there. And so what we once thought was, you know, we could mitigate traffic with what we thought were good traffic measures. You know, how is it going to impact our traffic now? Are those 6,000 cars coming in and out of that space? Take a right and go up Sunrise Valley and take a right and go on Wiehle versus going the opposite way down Sunrise Valley and away from that intersection. I don't know. I guess that if they all take a right, because rights are usually very easy and they all just want to hop on the 267, you know, what will that do to that intersection, and how dangerous will that walking path be? It's the cheapest option.
Lori, I have a clarification.
Yeah.
This is Tammy.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we all need to keep in mind that no underpass or overpass bridge is going to be built on this site until the probably last of the Campus Commons Cornerstone building is built. That is the high-rise residential tower immediately adjacent to the toll road. This my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, this on-grade crossing is going to, this one we're talking about at the junction of the ramps and Wiehle, on Wiehle, is going to be built. It's not what we prefer. It's going to be built because it will be years before that high rise that sets in motion. The first rub on that is when any of the options for a bridge need to be built. Cornerstone is only financing 3 bridge options. They have excluded financing the tunnel. The other point would be if Comstock is building, and Maggie Parker is on this call, is going to be building on the west side, Comstock also has a responsibility to participate with connectivity of this whole quadrant. So I think we have to understand we are getting this crossing. We're getting the one that exists on Sunrise and Wiehle, and we're getting this one. And it's how best can this one be developed while we have to use it. You know, then when Comstock comes into the picture and starts figuring out what they're actually going to do with their newly purchased west corner of this quadrant, or directly west of Cornerstone Campus Commons, then that will put another factor into the discussion. Right now, they don't have any responsibility, but they will. So
Tammy.
So we can't deal with that, but we have to understand the process, the timing, and what we're really, I did not comment on what I preferred because this thing is going in, unless I totally misunderstand.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tammy. And you're right. We have to understand timing and we have to understand the big picture and cost benefit of putting in something now versus waiting till later, and what is going to be put in now. I want to, if we can, a lot of people learn different ways, and so one of the best ways to do it is visually, where we can see and digest some of the stuff that Mark's pulled together for us. Rob, would it be okay if we started to switch over and close out, unless somebody else has any more pros or cons on this at-grade crossing? I'd like to move to Mark's presentation of, so I want to couch this with, this is the first time you're going to see it. It's going to be a lot of information. We have a lot of people who couldn't make it tonight. And so.
Laura, you have a question from Michael Schindel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there someone who, Jose, did you turn him on?
Yeah, I'll do it right now. Give me one sec. We have two, I think.
Two questions? Okay. We'll get to those guys, and then we will move on to the presentation. But what I wanted to say is we are going to address timing. We are going to talk about, cost benefit. We are going to have more questions, and everything you're going to see tonight and everything you've worked on and is going to be shared. Our goal is to be completely transparent with this process and let the community weigh in and give Walter our feeling of what we think is the best, along with VDOT and FDOT and anybody else who's got a dot after their name. Sorry, that was just a joke. I know it's a little stiff here. Anyway, but we're going to get to it. We want to get to everybody. We want to be very transparent about what we're doing. So Tammy, to your point, we have a lot of work to do after this. This isn't the last meeting. So Jose, you had somebody?
Yeah, so we have Michael, who is unmuted now, and then we have two others after that, and I believe Scott wanted to make a comment as well.
Okay, super.
Thanks, Jose. This is Mike Schindeldecker. So I am an employee in the Commerce Metro Center to the southwest, and I've heard a lot of what my concerns with this crosswalk are. The biggest one for me is the width of this is 150 some feet. That is a massive crosswalk, and as somebody who drives through this twice a day, every day for past few years, all I can think of is the same crossing we had up at the WNOD. Now, it may not be the same number of people, but it scares me going to that crosswalk because of how wide it is. It's difficult for me as a driver to identify conflicts. So I don't know if it belongs in traffic calming, but any visual aids, or I don't know if the applicant has considered the number of lanes and the impact site has on the potential safety of this crosswalk, mostly because of the number of lanes for the northbound section. It's already 6 lanes, and that's just a really wide crosswalk. So
thank you. So you have a con, number 2, the crossing time is just way too long.
Well, that's a separate concern, is the operations of the signal and how much time this crosswalk would take if actuated during a signal. But mostly the number of vehicles that I know queue along this approach and the potential sight distance of pedestrians. Anything we can do to make them more visible would be helpful.
Okay, so Jose, can you add crossing time too long in the number 2? And then, yeah, and then add under question number 1, the second part of that question. We're trying to mitigate. What does the moving the crosswalk do? Oh, we're trying to improve sight lines. And I think I think that's all going into mitigating that piece of the intersection. Mike, did that capture what you wanted to say?
For the most part.
Nuance it. I'm not a pro at that. I want to capture your thoughts. I'm just trying to meet you there.
Right. I guess my biggest concern is pedestrians crossing against the signal, which isn't something we can easily mitigate. I don't think that's the responsibility of the applicant to do that. It's more so just the number of lanes, especially for the northbound approach. You know, people crossing kind of late, running across, but being obstructed by vehicles sitting at the stop bar, and you know, people feeling comfortable going through this rather wide roadway without looking for pedestrians.
So thank you, Jose. So it's the number of lanes that is more concerning than the time.
Yeah, that would be fair.
The fact that there's a number of lanes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, a little slow tonight. Who is next, Jose?
I'm probably gonna not pronounce your name right. Fianola Quinn? She's unmuted now.
Yeah, hi, I'm Fanula Quinn, and I'm joining this today because I saw the little piece in Supervisor Alcorn's email this morning about the meeting. So I don't really have any real knowledge of the project. I'm really just commenting on what you put on the screen earlier. But I want to just say, when we talk about the pork chop, that's really a pedestrian refuge island. The combination of those long crossing distances and the multiple lanes creates that very unsafe pedestrian environment. And that refuge island does improve safety and comfort for pedestrians. And it gives them the option of a waiting area before making the next stage of the crossing. And you really have to be considering all the types of pedestrians, the elderly, the visually impaired. Now, there's a caveat there because that particular layout is difficult for visually impaired. So it's balancing all the users. But again, I mean, good design, you know, shifting the design focus onto the pedestrians for the refuge island, reducing the radii where you can. I mean, when you see those two right turn lanes with that huge turning radius, that's of great concern because we know pedestrians are going to try and dart across there. But, you know, balancing everything to get the optimal design. But when people are talking about taking out that refuge island, they're putting the pedestrians in a different position. And right now, with that island there, that allows pedestrians to focus on the crossing one portion at a time. They look one direction, they get to a safe area. It divides their crossing and it improves their visibility and sight lines for their subsequent parts of the crossing. So anything that can be done to reduce pedestrian exposure while balancing their risk. And that exposure can be reduced by reducing the number of lanes. So any number of lanes that can be reduced and any of that lane width that can be reduced will improve safety. But I think we already know that people are going to cross at grade, even if you provide those alternatives. So it's best to put the most safety into the at grade crossing. And I also wanted to mention something we usually don't talk about at this stage in the process, but it's a huge factor in the safety of these crossings is lighting. So putting emphasis into lighting as part of the design is very helpful also. But, you know, unreasonable wait times are also a factor. So optimal design of, to get across the street, shifting the balance over to the pedestrian and away from the drivers, away from their speed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my comment.
Thank you for sharing and thank you for coming. Jose, was there one more person?
Yes, and I'm gonna mute them right now. Oh, found them. It's Sarah Skelly.
Okay, Sarah.
Thank you, Lori, and I appreciate the many thoughtful comments, and will try not to repeat myself. But I did want to emphasize that this area is clearly going to become one of the most highly trafficked areas, if not the most highly trafficked area in Reston. And I think it would be very helpful to see other examples of how pedestrian facilitation is achieved in other highly trafficked areas in Reston or throughout Fairfax County, so that the study group can see these best practices and apply them. I think that there are better solutions than the pork chop. I've been consistently on record. I think the community's been discussing the pork chop for well over a year now. And, I think they're consistently not in favor of this due to safety related that has been, discussed. And I think the concept of traffic calming is an interesting one, but if really implemented, it's only going to contribute to greater gridlock that is already forming. I mean, we're not even at, we're not even at full capacity and we're nearing gridlock. And so if we, slow it down, it's only going to get worse. My preference would be not to have any pedestrians at Sunrise and Wiehle, but encourage them to cross at the bridge that is planned upward, kind of toward McDonald's, if you will, from Wiehle at the Campus Commons development. And so, from my pedestrian perspective and just observing this for so many years, it's just not practical to think of, the elderly, people with children, trying to get across such a highly trafficked area. I think it would be ideal to have as many well-designed crosswalks all the way down Sunrise Valley so that you're not forcing residents to choose between one or two highly trafficked intersections. And my last comment is considering how to use the Campus Commons property to facilitate exit not onto Sunrise Valley, but property for exit onto the highway, as well as facilitating eastbound exiting, right? So you don't have all these people, coming out of two exits at Campus Commons crowding onto Sunrise Valley. There's got to be a more creative solution to get them onto the highway toward DC, or to get them, what would that be, eastbound toward the exit that's closer to DC and not cramming into Sunrise and Wiehle.
Okay, so Sarah, I'm gonna try and recapture what you said so we can capture it in Jose's notes here. One of the cons that you brought up that I wrote down was gridlock. This is something that, having a crossing versus having, a tunnel, you immediately have gridlock, and you're concerned that this is going to be, and again, I'm going to put this as a con. Right now, this is going to be one of the most highly trafficked places, being that the building that is expected to be coming, that has already been approved. So tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong, or if you feel free to chime in. I'm trying to chat.
Hey, Lori, not just the building, but the entire development along that Sunrise Valley corridor is going to create massive traffic.
Right. Okay. So I think, and if you have to stop the traffic for crosswalks and the crosswalks are long, you're just going to have gridlock. So is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. I think I had a question that you were. Oh, your question was, is it possible to have people move to the north end instead of Wiehle and Sunset? Is that what you're saying? Instead of Wiehle and Sunrise?
It is my understanding that there's going to be a bridge at Wiehle going across from Campus Commons to where the buses are essentially right now. And is there a way to get the pedestrians not at Sunrise and Wiehle at that, highly trafficked square, the pork chop, all of that, and get them to either get onto Campus Commons to get to the metro with, kind of down Sunrise Valley and not converging at that square, if you will. And then to your question, is there a way, if people in our neighborhood, if you will, at Upper Lake Drive, right, they're going to want to either go left and then get onto the Campus Common Metro by going left, or maybe perhaps they'll go right and then through the Campus Commons property and across that bridge to get to the Metro. What I'm trying to achieve is just not allow them to cross there at that dangerous intersection.
I don't know how to put that into a pro or a con, so it's a different insight. I'm gonna, if we have concerns, it's gonna be a huge intersection. It's gonna grow into a huge intersection. So, thank you, Sarah, for sharing your thoughts.
I guess the one last thing I do want to emphasize is looking at best practices and bringing that to the study group. So that
Okay, so the question is, are there best practices that we can look at?
Right.
So that's a question for our consultant. Okay.
Hey, Lori.
Yes.
This is Rob. There's a question in the chat, in the group chat. A new resident wasn't exactly sure how to, articulate his comment, and I don't know if he's able to connect, but I'll just read it. It says, he supports the at grade, no bridge option. This is a fellow by the name of Carl Schultz. And he says in the future, it would be, I have to reword this, but completely be, he's talking about a tunnel due to the ease and due to concerns of increased driver traffic across a really long crosswalk. So sounds like he's in favor of the at grade initially, and then would like to see ultimately a tunnel. That was
a tunnel, an underpass, yeah. Okay. I don't want to hurry this piece, but I also want to get to our presentation tonight. That's first, I'm sure, of several evenings just delving into this a little bit more. But is there anything else, Jose, that we need to?
Yeah, I wanted to circle back with Scott. He wanted to make a quick comment before we move to the. Hey, Scott, you're unmuted, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Just a couple of quick comments. Lori, to your point about COVID, we in the field have no idea what the impacts are going to be. So right now we are all flying completely blind with.
Thank you for being honest. Thank you.
With traffic projections, we really don't know. The impacts could be small, they could be great. To the lesser, to the greater, we don't know. We really do not know, and we may not know for another year, 2 years before we even start to see a trend develop. The other piece I wanted to point out very quickly was that traffic through that specific corridor between Sunrise Valley and Sunset Hills should be expected to change with the opening of phase 2 for revenue service, because Wiehle is no longer the terminus.
Can you explain what terminus means?
Yeah, right now it's the end of the line for the Silver Line. When phase 2 opens for revenue service, the end of the line is going to be somewhere west of Dulles Airport. So right now, anybody who wants to get on that Silver Line has to come to Wiehle by some measure. So when those other 7 stations open, it would be expected to relieve some pressure off of the Wiehle Avenue station. And to the point of I forget who made it, we need to look seriously at how this at-grade crossing is planned, because history has shown, even when you provide an underpass, and particularly when you provide an overpass, jurisdictions come back and ask for, or landowners come back and ask for a properly designed crosswalk because pedestrians don't use those other facilities. And I'm not being negative. I'm giving you the history. I'm giving you the truth. I'm giving you the experience of being a traffic engineer.
Thank you. So I think we already have you recorded as just on this being the best option, right?
Yes, ma'am. I do believe that a well-designed, I do. This is probably the second best option. A tunnel, or an underpass, I believe, would be the ultimate best option if designed properly. But I think the most achievable option is this.
Okay, super. Jose, you must be working on something, getting things ready in the background.
Yeah, sorry for the typing. Yeah, Mark Dreyfus now is going to present his slides.
Okay, super. Thank you, Mark. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Really quickly, I'm going to jump into my presentation here. My name is Mark Dreyfus. I am a senior transportation planner with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation. Before I get into my presentation, I wanted to touch on one thing that was discussed a lot here tonight, which is the pork chop. The reason that there is a pork chop being proposed is because of the way that the intersection is aligned with traffic coming off of the toll road. Without a pork chop, if the crosswalk just went to the other corner, we would have to, from traffic operations perspective, stop all cars while people are crossing, because there would be no movements that would be safe to make except people making a left off the toll road, but then we'd have to turn on the green to allow people to make a right off the toll road. And so the purpose of the pork chop is to allow traffic coming off of the toll road, whether it's making a left or a right onto Wiehle Avenue, to be able to go at the same time as pedestrians without conflicting with pedestrians. So pedestrians are crossing and the cars are kind of splitting before the intersection and able to go. And so that's the reason for the pork chop. I agree with a lot of what's been said this evening about the fact that generally we do not prefer pork chops. We would prefer a shorter crossing distance. And with something that Kevin Nelson mentioned, this the right turns would be signalized. There'd be no turn on red as they are today. So you come off, you wait until you have a green arrow and you can go. The pork chop will be a little bit different than it is at Sunrise Valley and Wiehle Avenue. Snow maintenance and all of that is a concern, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I hope that explains a little bit. But to get into the presentation, here we go. Tonight, I'm going to go over a very short background of the study group effort. I know Rob did that earlier. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've come from and what I've heard from all of you over the last few months. And then I'm going to turn it over to Colin McCormick with Fair and Peers, who's going to give a presentation. This is kind of part one. We're going to come back in October with part two with some additional information at that time. So I want to make you aware of all of that. We'll have a few minutes at the end for some questions and comments on the presentation. But again, there will be things we bring back in October, and then I'll explain a little bit about what we're doing at that point. So why are we here? Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, I just want people to know that they should be, if they don't have this presentation, that they will have it. That this is meant to be aligned with our pros, cons, and questions, and that you took a lot of. I have not as yet, apologized, done a one-for-one comparison with the information that you have here and what the people have on their list. And So I do owe them that accountability. So I'll do it before the next meeting and get back to you. So to make sure that we have not left anything out. But so I just want to make sure that that's clear, that this is just the first, and we will, I'm sure, have lots more questions for you. But thank you.
Sure. And I appreciate that clarification. I will talk in a moment about very high level summary of some of your comments. I have been sitting here typing everything that you all have said, along with Jose, for the last few months, and trying to fit that all into one slide. And we heard a lot of things. We tried to generally capture that. So if you don't see your specific comment, please know we still have it. It's still part of the record, and we're still considering it. These are just high level. So thank you very much. So getting back to this, the Campus Commons application was approved on October 15th, 2019, and it included a commitment to construct one of 3 bridge options or to provide a contribution of $1.65 million to an alternative. The application included a separate commitment, as Tammy mentioned, to an at-grade crossing of Wiehle Avenue. This could be in addition to a bridge or tunnel option, or it could be in lieu of those. So they have committed to put this in, as Scott mentioned at the end, and somebody else mentioned about best practices. People will want to cross that grade regardless of other options generally, and so providing a way for them to do that, regardless of how we work through this process, can be a positive. This group was formed in December of 2019. And I think we then met in early 2020, and was tasked with determining the preferred crossing of Wiehle Avenue at the Dulles Tollway. The group, per the proffers, are tasked with recommending a preferred option to the Board of Supervisors within 2 years of approval, which would be October of next year. And the Board of Supervisors has to make a final determination within a year of the study group's recommendation. And so that would be no later than October of 2022. All right, so quickly, again, I'm going to review the discussions. These should be relatively brief and high level. In terms of overpasses, there were 2 discussions about the overpasses, one about option A, one about option B and C. The major advantages that were described with the overpasses were that they're developer funded, which was noted several times, that they're something that we have a high level of confidence would be built if that's what the board decides in the end to go with, and that they separate pedestrians from traffic. The challenges, TF Cornerstone mentioned that these would be open bridges, which can be hot, wet, or icy. A lot of these options have indirect paths or maybe inconvenient for some people, especially options A and C in terms of long ramps, and option B in terms of having to get up onto the bridge via elevator or stairs. The crossing time, which Cullen will talk about in a little while. Bicycle access in terms of bicycles fitting into elevators or being carried upstairs. The lack of street activation, which means the lack of people that would be drawn to walk along Wiehle Avenue. Utilization concerns. So there have been successful overpasses, there have been less successful overpasses in terms of how highly utilized they are and how comfortable people are using them. The grade issues, which was mentioned this evening as well. It's a 30-foot incline from the site up to Wiehle Avenue, and then going higher up to get to a bridge. Potential site impacts, especially to the west side of the street, with options A and C. You could see the long bridges that would have impacts on the west side development. Visual impacts of the actual structure itself coming across Wiehle Avenue, and of course maintenance and cleaning issues. So I want to talk a little bit more about maintenance. The elevators, for anybody who rides Metro, you'll hear from time to time that elevators are out and you need to go to a different station and there's a shuttle bus. If there's elevators here, if there's one elevator, there's no shuttle bus. So that is a concern to keep in mind, that while we could build a beautiful overpass here, we could have long-term issues with elevators. They need maintenance, they go out of service, as well as the impacts of those issues on ADA. Cleaning, there's debris, there's smells, there's graffiti, there's vandalism that somebody would need to take care of. And then of course there's snow and ice clearance. one of the challenges we have here is that TF Cornerstone's proffer says they'll take care of what's on their site, but the rest of the responsibility for the overpass would be to be determined. At this time, VDOT and FCDOT do not maintain overpasses generally, and so this, or at least elevators, there are some places we maintain overpasses, but it is a large responsibility and that has long-term costs. So what I wanted to do was step back, and one of the things that a lot of people mentioned while we were listening to everybody's comments and questions was what's going on in Reston. And so I went out and got some pictures of what exists in Reston today. I think perhaps the most prominent overpass in Reston is this one at the Wiehle Avenue and North Shore Drive. It's been there for, I believe, over 50 years. And as you can see, I wanted to note a few challenges with overpasses. So in the top left, you'll see that if you want to continue straight along North Shore Drive, you actually have to divert off to the left and go up. And then in the top right, you'll see that there can be sightline issues because of things like trees. There could also be issues in terms of things like stairs and ramps and that sort of thing. And then on the bottom, you'll see that, because ramps take up space, as you come down, you have to divert out of the way. One thing to keep in mind here is this bridge is not ADA compliant. The grades here are pretty steep. And so what you see here in terms of grades, you would have to be much calmer going up. So if we were going to build this bridge today, it would need to be much longer than this. Moving on to the underpass discussion. The advantages were a bit more plentiful. It makes use of the existing grade of the site, both sites being lower than Wiehle Avenue, which was raised to go over the toll road several decades ago. As such, no major elevations are needed. Changes are needed to reach the tunnel. This is protected from the elements, which all of that together provides for easier ADA access. There's no visual impacts from the road, of course, because it's below the road. The challenges are something that was mentioned a lot tonight, the length. So a tunnel would be about 170 feet wide, at-grade crossing would be about 140 feet wide. The safety concerns of a tunnel, costs, funding, this would obviously be a large public cost. The timing then therefore is uncertain because we don't have funding for it at this time. The feasibility, which the consultants are working on and we'll bring you more information about in October. The lack of street activation, again, people wouldn't be coming up to Wiehle Avenue. Maintenance and cleaning, again, with responsibility to be determined, and vandalism and graffiti. So I did the same thing with going out, and obviously Reston is very proud of its underpasses. And I found, went to several underpasses. I provided, it was about 4 different underpasses I looked at here. The first one is at Reston Parkway under Bowmantown Drive at the Spectrum Center. And this one was mentioned a few times. This is about 90 feet long, so compare that to about 170 feet. It's 12 feet wide, 12 feet high, and as you'll see, there's clear sight lines on each end, which is very important. Nobody can really hide in the shadows. The challenge of this is a challenge you're going to have with a lot of underpasses. You'll see there's rainwater on the ground, and that green pad is actually there to provide a non-slick surface when there's stormwater issues. And so this is something I saw at a few of them that I visited, but something to keep in mind. You'll see there's a lot of lighting. It's pretty good. These were taken in the morning. I observed people using them. So this is a good example of what an underpass could look like. As we move on, this is under Baron Cameron Avenue at Browns Chapel Park. It is just north of Lake Ann and Washington Plaza. It's now about 10 feet high, so you'll see it's a little bit lower. It feels a little bit more like a tunnel. The lights are on the side. And so again, you have clear sight lines, but in the bottom picture, you can see that it creates some shadows. And at the end, there's hills, so you can't necessarily see who's coming into the tunnel. This one is closest to a lot of you. It's at South Lakes Drive at the shopping center. And one of the things you'll notice with this one is that you actually dive down to the underpass, and then you have to come back up, which makes it very difficult to see what's going on the other side. You may not be able to notice it from here, but there's actually a person under the underpass in the picture on the left. And you can see the person. They're kind of silhouetted, but if you were walking at night, or if you were walking at certain times of day, you might not know somebody was under there. So this also has kind of limited lighting. This one is, again, 90 feet long and only about an 8-foot high ceiling. So as you get shorter, it creates more shadows. This last one is very different. This one is under South Lakes Drive at South Lakes Drive Park. And one thing that's interesting here is it has a higher ceiling. The actual tube, I'll call it, is wide, but the trail is only 6 feet wide. And so you end up with a situation in which when I walked through here, there was someone walking through the other way, and given COVID and everything, it was a little bit uncomfortable to pass. And so width makes this huge difference, but also height. In this case, you can see all the way to the end, but you get some shadows due to the length of the underpass. So just to recap, as a last step, since we talked about the overpasses and the underpass, what I heard tonight was that has advantages of an at-grade crossing. It's the fastest to implement. It's the cheapest option, the most direct option, and it may provide some traffic calming. The challenges, biggest one I heard was safety, also crossing time, snow clearance at the pork chop, and how it affects signal timing and drivers along the corridor. So that's just sort of a recap of what you all have talked about. I know that you remember other things that you may have mentioned as well. But I hope I did it justice in general to go through that. And what as we thought about all of this, we noticed some general trends, and there's some key considerations that we hope that you all will think about as tonight and in October and in November as you come to your preferences, which are the long-term viability of each crossing type, the demand or utilization of each crossing type, the desirability of each crossing for users, the aesthetics, placemaking, modal balance, which one of the folks here tonight spoke to this, which is how are we doing justice, doing the best improvement we can for drivers, for transit users, for bicyclists, and for pedestrians. Safety, and of course, ongoing long-term maintenance, which is a more significant cost for some things than others. And with that, I want to introduce the consultant. Farron Piers is a national multimodal planning consulting firm. We've had them on since about July 15th. So they've been with us for about 2 months. So they've caught up pretty quickly. They've been doing great work, but they've only been with us a short time. And they actually have a sub-consultant as well, STV, which is doing civil engineering work and reviewing of the crossing options, including the overpasses. STV has worked on numerous multimodal projects across the country, including currently the Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit Project. And so the county is very familiar with them. With that, I want to turn it over to Colin McCormick of Farron Piers. Colin, take it away.
Great, thanks, Mark. Well, before I get started, I do want to apologize. My neighbors decided to play some rather loud electronic dance music, so I hope you either enjoy electronic dance music or can't hear it as well as I can. So if we go through the slides here, essentially what I'm going to do is cover 3 main topics this evening. Giving a quick recap of some of the project alternatives, going through some of the key responses to the study questions, building on some of the points that Mark just made, and then last out, rounding out with some examples. I know we heard earlier a desire to hear some narrative and some example images of some best practices from other jurisdictions. So the hope is that we can pull some of that into the presentation here as we round out. So as you'll see on the next slide here, this is just kind of a transition. We're covering some study area considerations. A lot of this has already been voiced, so I won't dwell too long here. I know I do want to try to get us out on time. We do have this fairly substantial elevation change, as folks have noted, going between the Campus Commons site and the intersection of the toll road, Wiehle Avenue. As other folks have mentioned, rather lengthy crossing distance, so that has all sorts of implications for what can be done and sort of the efficacy of it. And then just last, kind of noting that we were out here walking around a couple weeks ago. There are a lot of just desire lines or existing paths that have been blazed through parking lots, landscaping, as you can see in the photo on the right there, and just sort of existing patterns that will need to be contextualized as we think about how people move about this area. So then this slide and the following essentially give another visual of the different crossing alternatives. I know some folks mentioned being kind of more visual learners, so hopefully this slightly more three-dimensional visualization here can help to showcase some of the differences between the different alternatives. So if you look at the option on the far left there, option A, you can see it's got this ramp on the left side, the west side of Wiehle Avenue, that doubles back and also includes a staircase. Then it sort of crosses Wiehle right at the intersection there and would have an elevator and a stairwell on the eastern side. The option in the middle, a little bit more straightforward in its footprint here, elevators on both sides, staircases on both sides. The third alternative would be all ramps, so no elevators or any types of moving circulation like that, would begin in a similar spot to option A, but as you can see, would actually extend further south and would link up with one of the buildings that's being proposed in Campus Commons. So those are the three ramp alternatives. Next slide shows some of the other variants. You see on the left is a tunnel. It would essentially find the narrowest point of the Wiehle Avenue kind of cross section there. You can see the gray in that image is representing a retaining wall, which already exists. So creates a relatively effective structure to kind of punch through that tunnel with. And then the last two images, center and right, are the different at-grade options we're looking at. So the first one you can see there is right at the intersection and would have that pork chop island. And then would come across the median where there'd be another refuge for folks to break up the crossing. And then the last one was maybe a new idea that we haven't talked about so much on the call already, is this idea of potentially a mid-block crossing, which would be between the toll ramps or the toll road ramps and Sunrise Valley Drive, so further south. So again, let's just move right into the meat of the presentation. I think this is what folks are most probably interested in hearing tonight. We've basically taken all the study group questions and tried to boil them down into some more succinct language here, just attempted to kind of construct some themes throughout the different questions. And so first up, we'll talk about how long it takes to cross using each option. Then we'll go through some of the key origin destinations in the sites and kind of the desire lines where folks actually want to go and how different crossings might serve or not serve those desires. What are some of the multimodal impacts? This is probably the section that has the most we've already talked about. So if we're pressed for time, I may try to just breeze through that a little more quickly, but there are some important considerations there. And then last up, as many folks mentioned, are there any particular safety considerations that we need to be concerned about as we look at different at-grade crossing options? So first up, we'll spend a minute here trying to kind of go through what you're seeing on your screen. This is essentially a comparison of crossing times by alternative, I should say. So you've got the little thumbnails over on the left that kind of visualize the different crossing types and the names that we have been using consistently throughout the presentation here for the crosswalks, for the crossing treatments, and then just kind of a comparison of times. You'll see for a couple of the options, there's that kind of lighter yellow bar. Essentially what that means is that there's some variation between the different options for how you get across the street. Or if you look further down the slide, the at-grade alternatives between when you get to the signal. So, the fastest would be basically getting there right as the walk sign goes on, not having to wait. And then the slowest tends to be during the PM peak period where there's the longest cycle length, the longest amount of basically orange hand you'd be waiting for to cross the street. So you can generally see, and I think some of this is somewhat intuitive, but you can generally see that the bridge alternatives require the most time to cross, right? Because they have a lot of these kind of lengthy ramps that folks would need to traverse. There's also the added elevation, which tends to slow walking speed or biking speed. And then at the bottom, you have the different kind of at-grade crossings. And then at the very bottom, you can see we've thrown in Wiehle Avenue and Sunrise Valley there just as a comparison. So I think, as folks have noted, because the intersection at the toll roads is a little bit more of kind of a big intersection, has some longer signal lengths, we would expect to see some longer crossing times there. But you'll see in the middle of the slide here, probably maybe what's unique and kind of the one that stands out here is that because the underpass allows someone to basically not have to wait at all and progress essentially at grade since Wiehle goes up and over, it has the shortest and most consistent crossing time. So this slide here is getting into some of the key origin destinations where folks are going. A lot of this is sort of what we've talked about already, which is just the fact that there's a lot of development coming to this area, major transit stop, a lot of what folks will call transit-oriented development, where you may not necessarily need to drive to your work or place of residence or places where you hang out. You can actually take the metro. And of course, as the train line continues further west towards Dulles, the potential for ridership probably increases. So you may see more people come to these areas. But kind of in summary, we've got some of the existing developments or developments that are kind of essentially wrapping up right now. Reston Station, the under construction Reston Station Promenade. As of course we've talked about Campus Commons, the projects in focus tonight, and then also Commerce Metro Center, which is across Wiehle Avenue, which is another slated development. And then Midline, which of course is the northeast corner there of the toll road in Wiehle. And then, saving the best for last year, the residences at the bottom. Folks, of course, live in the neighborhood. So when we did this analysis here, based on kind of our own observed travel conditions in the area, some kind of, desktop analysis of existing proposed travel routes, what we know is that there is this general north-south circulation pattern of folks either coming and going from the metro rail station, going to and from either retail or jobs or restaurants, things like that. But the people are filtering kind of from either the neighborhoods at the bottom or the metro rail station in the middle to the commercial and office space and residential towers in the proposed development sites. So if we think about people crossing Wiehle Avenue kind of in our focus area between the toll road and Sunrise Valley, many of these crossing alternatives that we're studying would satisfy pedestrian desire lines. Some of the alternatives do require some out of direction travel, which will of course lengthen trips. And then of course there's the grade change coming up over Wiehle Avenue, which will of course be an influence as well for paths that people choose to take. People are of course likely to avoid the significant elevation change if there's a flatter alternative. And then it's important to note that while sites will be redeveloping, it's probably safe to say that people will still continue to cut through or will, as development patterns are finalized and new buildings are in place, find new cut through routes. So that kind of organic filtration through the sites is not likely to cease as long as there are permeable routes through there. So this next set of slides here essentially begins to show some of the pros and cons with these sort of site location-based or multimodal type impacts for the different alternatives. And we try to go through the pros and the cons like we were doing earlier tonight. So we'll just basically knock them out one by one here. The first bridge option, it's nice in that it's got this direct connection to the Metro Plaza. It alleviates any type of conflicts between different modes, but has kind of a laundry list of cons here. Many things folks have talked about earlier. There's a lot of out of direction travel. The ramps and the elevators and the elevation change we talked about may discourage use. There's this sort of notion that if people are up and above on this ramp, they're not walking along the street. So there's that takes away from this concept of placemaking or of kind of street activation, having people out there, which can result in sort of people feeling more comfortable walking or can kind of generate sort of interest in the area. There's sort of this placemaking element to that. It sort of can create this highway experience, like if you think a freeway overpass or I'm picturing some of the crossings along US 50, like it isn't maybe as inviting of a walking environment. It's something that's more designed to allow someone to kind of take more of a direct route. And then as Mark mentioned earlier, there are these ADA concerns, both with the ramp itself and just having folks need to go up that, but then also if one of these elevators is to go out of service, it kind of would be unfortunate if you'd wheeled all the way up to the ramp and got to the far side if you're coming from west to east, only to find that the elevator's not working. You have to go all the way back. So I think there is that ADA concern there. For the second bridge option here, it's a pure use of elevators, so it kind of doubles down on that potential ADA concern. But it does, in doing so, also minimize any out of direction travel. Some of the cons, of course, we're still requiring users to go potentially up from the Campus Commons site to the grade of Wiehle Avenue and the toll road ramps, and then go up and above again. And it's particularly if there's already a crosswalk there, I think a lot of folks will probably make the mental calculation and saying, why am I going to use this bridge when I could probably save some time and just walk right across the street? And then this mirrors some of the other alternatives for the bridges in that it creates these ADA concerns and this what we'll call this highway experience. So then the last bridge option here, actually by getting rid of the elevators, does do a little bit of an advantage for kind of folks who are rolling through the area, either on bike or a wheelchair. It carries that direct connection to the Metro Rail Plaza, and also has fewer multimodal conflicts because again we're separating the different people who are moving by different modes. This ramp though probably has the most out of direction travel for folks who are not necessarily going directly to the campus commons site. You essentially the way this is envisioned is you'd go into like a stairwell or kind of an elevator lobby in one of the campus common buildings. Then you'd filter down to the site there and use basically the on-site walking pass to get to your destination. So this might potentially discourage folks who are not familiar with the campus commons site or who are potentially trying to go somewhere that's not immediately served by this route from using this crossing. And in doing so, the out of direction travel here would also have the tendency to extend travel times. As a lot of bridges, of course, there's some of the maintenance issues, some of the weather issues, and then that notion of the highway experience. So then the underpass, we try to be sort of just the facts here, kind of looking at these different crossings. But although costly, the underpass does have this natural advantage that it takes advantage of the grade, which is already present to avoid excessive elevation change. It has, as we saw earlier, that very short, consistent crossing time that basically outperforms any of the other alternatives. And like the bridges, it doesn't have any of these multimodal conflicts that we've talked about. Some potential out of direction travel could occur here, like if you're potentially coming from the kind of like the neighborhoods that are to the southeast, for example. You would of course have to go down into the campus commons site to cross here. I think we can probably assume a fair amount of folks are going to the Metro Rail station, so probably less out of direction travel on the west side. But if you did, for example, come across the road bridge across the toll road and you wanted to use this underpass, since they're if you don't want to use the at-grade crossing, you'd of course have to make your way down to the recessed lower grade where the tunnel is located. And then as with all tunnels, it tends to have a higher cost because you'd have to actually bore the tunnel through the retaining wall there. You couldn't do a cut and cover, which is basically where you dig a hole and you put a top back on it, because that would affect traffic operations on the road. The design, of course, is very critical to folks feeling safe using this, and going hand in hand with that, there are potential security concerns related to lighting or cleanliness or potentially stormwater being in this tunnel. So then last up, we've got the two at-grade intersections here. As folks have noted earlier in the comment period, this is probably this may be the lowest cost treatment. We're still working on the cost estimates, but because essentially it would have already signaling infrastructure in place, it would just require some modifications. In this case, adding the pork chop, adding some pedestrian signal heads, relatively low cost. Because it's going straight from point to point, crossing the intersection here from one corner to the other, there's no real out of direction travel that will be associated with this. Because it encourages folks to basically, walk on the street, be in kind of in the public realm here. It has this potential to increase street activation, and this alternative can potentially achieve this modal balance by, as I think Mark mentioned earlier, with the pork chop that allows auto traffic to move coming off of the toll road ramps, while folks can cross safely and not have to cross two turning lanes there without a protected signal to get them across. There are some cons to this approach. I think folks have mentioned safety, which we'll talk about actually in a couple of slides here. Signal timing would also be required. Basically to move the same folks through the intersection here, we need to do some modifications, which are, I think, already considered by the applicant's plan for this crossing here. And then I think, as folks noticed earlier, it would require people who are walking to have this two-stage crossing. So picture if you're coming from what's currently shown as the bus plaza in this rendering, which of course the bus plaza will go away, but that sort of area will stay the same. You'd first have to cross onto the pork chop island, which is that very yellow piece of kind of crosswalk, yeah, where Mark's arrow is there. And then because of the way that the traffic moves, most likely you would need to wait to then cross again to go across Wiehle Avenue. So that's what we mean by a two-stage crossing there. And at the mid-block here, this would again be one of these lower cross treatments because it's just going to require signaling. And what's actually potentially nice from a pedestrian standpoint is that you don't have any turning vehicles here, so there are fewer conflicts for someone who's crossing the street. I think it's also because it's in the mid-block, you don't have the corner radii, which is where cars turn from Wiehle onto the toll road. You've actually got a shorter crossing distance, and you still have that median there to break up the distance in the middle. Of course, though, there are cons to this alternative, and that adding a new crossing between the relatively short distance of Sunrise Valley and the toll road ramps could potentially create a new factor that creates driver delay, as it would be one more place where someone might have to stop. We call these hawk signals. Basically, it's kind of a push button that a pedestrian pushes to make the signal turn, to the walk sign for them and stop cars. Hawk is just a jargony way of putting that. But adding this hawk signal would be more expensive than the pedestrian signal heads at the intersection crossing because of the new infrastructure that would need to be installed, potentially coordinated with the other traffic signals. This crossing would likely still have the two-stage to get folks across in a safe amount of time, given that it is a fairly wide crossing. And then it would also have some safety concerns. Sometimes folks don't cross for these types of pedestrian. Sorry, I didn't say that right. Sometimes people don't wait for people who are crossing these types of crossings, and you can potentially run into issues of cars and people having conflicts there, which is sort of the last bullet here of the lack of driver expectation. So this slide attempts to basically try to put all of the different at-grade crossing safety considerations onto one set of axes here and identify some potential strategies for how we might approach them. So I'll just go down these one by one. Of course, there's this long crossing distance, which it increases what we would call pedestrian exposure to traffic, the amount of time that they're in the road. The two-stage crossing can do something to help that. It, of course, does increase the crossing time. And then there are at the intersection, the pork chop potentially, and then the median refuge island in the middle of the street, which can give folks a place to rest so they're not doing the crossing all in one length. They're not entirely exposed to traffic for the entire time. And then this treatment could be applicable both at the intersection and the mid-block crossing locations. And I recognize this is a little bit wonky and jargony, so there's some comments that we can address at the end here, with some questions rather.
Mark, I don't want you to hurry. I do want to go through this whole thing. And then when you come back, if you could come back with this with page numbers, because I think everybody, and we'll send it out with page numbers, because I have questions on every page and I know other people will. Okay, so don't worry, just go ahead through it.
That's fine. There are page numbers at the bottom of every page. So
I can't see them. I guess that's little people in front of.
So they should be in the PD. They should be in the PDF. So I'd be glad to take questions that way. Anyway, I'll let Colin.
Okay,
Yeah.
Colin,
right. The WebEx controls are blocking it. You're totally right.
Yes,
I can see them on a full screen.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Great. So then, yeah, I think as we've talked about, there's this potential conflict between turning vehicles and people who are walking, particularly at the intersection there. You've got two lanes of right turns coming off of the eastbound ramps from the toll road. And you can probably picture in the PM rush hours, everyone's coming home. There can be a lot of volumes there. There's also the right turn from northbound Wiehle onto the eastbound on-ramps to the toll road. So there are a lot of potential points of conflict here. But the refuge islands can actually do something to mitigate that. There was a lot of talk about some of the relative trade-offs of the pros and cons of pork chop islands. Certainly I wouldn't want to be on one with a rampant dog myself, but they are actually recognized as a sort of a recommended pedestrian countermeasure, which is a fancy way of saying safety treatment by the Federal Highway Administration when they are designed, kind of with a well-designed kind of treatment in mind. So they can actually do a lot to reduce the exposure between turning vehicles and people walking. But of course, as we've noted, they have that they have that, what I think what I'll call an inconvenience of increasing the crossing time, or the time to walk across the crossing. This next one here relates to the mid-block location. There's this hawk signal, which essentially the way it works, if you're a pedestrian, you push a button. Once it's your time to go, a flashing red signal appears for motorists telling them to basically stop driving. Can't think of a better way to put that. And then you get a white walk signal to cross the street. So the problem with these types of what we call half signals or beacons is that they motorists don't always stop at them. Or if you get someone stopping in the first lane, but someone in the second, or in this case, the third or the fourth lane doesn't stop, you've got a potential conflict here. So the hawk signal can mitigate that, and as can enforcement, but there's, as this is somewhat of a new treatment that agencies across the country are rolling out, there's still somewhat of a learning curve that goes with it. So it's important to consider that. And then last up, I think, as folks have noted, it's a fairly wide intersection. So there are potential treatments that can be put into practice, either adding bike lanes, narrowing the lanes themselves, reducing the corner radii at the intersections, which may potentially have some implications for the need for a pork chop island, although there are other traffic movement considerations that kind of conflate that. But essentially, there are opportunities out there if we do. I think if folks are interested to kind of consider the whole gamut of options that do include traffic calming, to potentially do things about making it a narrower intersection. So then last up here, and we'll try to get through these quickly here so we can answer some questions. We'll look at some example crossings. The first one you'll see here is right in DC. We just kind of skip the slide here. The reach at the Kennedy Center. I think the important thing to note here is that, well, one, you don't get this view in Reston, so there's no Georgetown waterfront there. But the key thing what I think makes this a highly used crossing is that there's a natural need to get up and over and change grades here. So there is no kind of at-grade alternative to this, and it's also along a very heavily used walking and biking trail and leads to a major cultural institution. So I think that there's maybe not a direct comparison, although operationally the crossing that could get built in Wiehle might look similar. It's also important to note here, as Scott mentioned earlier, a lot of these types of crossings in Florida, this is actually an example image from Florida here. There would also be this kind of monument tower that would include the elevator shaft that folks would need for the ADA crossing. So the reach, while a good local example, does not include elevators. So the next slide, we'll get into some kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly here of underpass designs. We'll start out with some kind of better looking ones. This kind of covers a lot of the points that Mark made earlier. Generally speaking, good underpasses are wide and they have good lighting and good drainage. These are some examples where I think folks would probably feel fairly comfortable walking through them. They're at sort of train stations, major parks, neighborhoods, etc. The example images, and kind of give some proof positive that you can do these things right. But often, as these are fairly expensive treatments, as you'll see on the next slide, there can be this sort of cost-cutting desire to make them, sort of more utilitarian and kind of almost a sort of Soviet look kind of to them here with the lighting. When they're narrow or poorly lit or have unnatural lighting or limited kind of views of exits, I think that can be fairly discouraging, as folks can probably already attest from their own experiences. And particularly when tunnels don't have a view across, like you can see in the top right image there, you don't really know what you're getting into when you go down the stairs. That can be fairly intimidating for some folks. And then of course the drainage issue that we talked about earlier. So we're almost done here. We're on the home stretch. These last couple images relate to some kind of good and bad at grade crossing designs. So these are all kind of examples of what we would consider fairly good crossings. The image in the top right there shows one of these hawk signals we mentioned earlier. You can see it's got those multiple red signals. But generally, kind of providing high visibility crosswalk treatments, providing median islands to get across, having pedestrian signals at the mid-block so that if you only want to go halfway, if you don't feel comfortable or it's bad weather or you've got kids with you or something, you can actuate the signal again to get to the other crossing to make it all the way across. These directional curb ramps, which basically point you in the right direction, particularly helpful if you are sort of hard of seeing or in a wheelchair so that you don't get spit right out into the intersection. And then these kind of, what you'll see in the largest image here, we call them shark teeth, those triangles there, advanced markings that indicate to the motorist that you need to stop before the crosswalk. And then really important is protected left or in some cases right turn phases so that you don't have cars trying to turn while people are also crossing the street. So that's probably the key reason I think why the pork chop is being proposed actually as a safety measure to make sure that when those heavy volumes of right turns are coming off or onto the toll road, you don't have people trying to cross at the same time. Of course, people will make opportunistic moves, and we can never design for everyone, but ultimately those protected turns are very much a safety treatment. These are some examples of where the engineers didn't quite get it just as right, and you can see kind of in the large image, less markings for pedestrians, kind of more of a utilitarian space, a larger crossing distance with no real area to stop in the middle, kind of lack of pedestrian signals in those places. You can see it in some of the images. Maybe the top right is the best example. These kind of larger corner radii where cars can just kind of come whipping around there. And because they are larger radii, they create a longer crossing distance. And then in some cases here, no crossing markings or no corner ramps for people to go down on their bike or their wheelchair. And then no protected turn phases, what we call permissive, where people can be at the same time that people are trying to cross.
So thank you, Colin. As Lori mentioned, we only have a few minutes. So what I'd like to do is just briefly introduce October, and then I'll turn it back to the group so I make sure that everybody's aware of what the next steps are. So what we hope to bring you next month are a few things. One is a crossing demand analysis. So looking at, one thing Colin mentioned in his presentation was, looking at how many people really want to get across the street here. So looking at how many people want to get across the street, and then how will each option affect use? And so, crossing times, the usability, the safety, et cetera, can affect those things. The other thing, as I mentioned, there's another firm working on this as well, STV, and they're conducting a cost estimates for all of the crossing options that Colin mentioned tonight. They're doing an engineering feasibility. So we'll bring some of that forward, and then there'll be lots of opportunities to ask. Turn it back over to Lori, and what would you like to do at this point, Lori?
Thank you, gentlemen. That was very thought-provoking. I got the questions. I can't wait to ask them all. I'm sure the folks that are here or not here are going to get a copy of this and want to have a lot of questions. Jose, did we pin down a date in October for our next meeting?
I believe we did. Yeah, it is. Let me pull up the agenda. October 15th. Yeah.
Okay, super. So it is almost 9 o'clock. We do end right on time. This has brought up a lot of thinking. I have lots of questions for all of you, and I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions as well. Jose, we have this whole presentation, and it does have page numbers on it, right?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I just checked the email I sent.
Okay, I just couldn't see it because the controls were blocking it. But I guess, Colin and Mark, would it be more helpful if people look at this and email you questions so that you have time to prepare for the 15th in advance?
Sure, I think that would be helpful. I want to let you know that I mentioned we're preparing part 2 of this presentation. So I've worked to try to provide some answers ahead of time, but if we can't provide them ahead of time, we can certainly address them at the meeting.
Okay, I don't mean to throw a million things on your plate, but I was just trying to be helpful. If it's...
No, it is certainly helpful to get your questions ahead of time. It allows us to think about them because we're likely, and my guess is we're going to get several questions that address similar topics.
So folks can, the Wiehle Study Group, Jose, can you put that email address on the top so that folks can see that again? And then Rob, did you want to close us out? Do you have some words to say or thoughts that
Well, I just want to thank, Mark and Colin, presentation, and, we appreciate your efforts, and we look forward to some of your continued analysis and at the next meeting on October 15th.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ron.
Jose, thanks for Rockstar.
You're welcome.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a great evening.